Hey everyone, welcome back to Lofi Startup. Today I'm joined by Max, my good friend and developer. And Max kindly lent us his time today. He was at Pottery earlier. Outside of being a developer, Max is an aspiring ceramicist.
So I am indeed.
Thank you once again for being here with us.
Cool.
Today we're chatting about how to build a startup's app. We get this question a lot, and we thought we'd share everything we know about the topic, and hopefully it gives you guys a bit of a understanding of what route you should go if you're deciding to build a mobile app.
There's a couple common questions I feel like a lot of people have, and I think it's going to be good to get everyone up to speed with what our thoughts are.
Let's get them up to speed. First thing we're going to talk about is, should I actually build a mobile app? This is something that's sort of super interesting, especially for like first-time product builders or startup founders, is like, what's actually the right time to build a mobile application, and should you even do it anyway? I think it comes down a lot to what type of user, what type of engagement is the app actually going to get. I mean, if you're looking at something like, let's say Uber, right? We take Uber once a week or once a month. You're looking at a weekly or monthly active user there. It makes sense to have a mobile app because like it's better than going on the web and like fumbling through like an authentication flow and trying to like stay logged in, and you know, it's just easy to have the app on your phone and kind of use it in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that in my case is very relevant. I'm working on a music app, and that's like some features are only possible if you have an app. I think you can do music and like media playback through the web and have sort of like an okay-ish experience, but I think there's just nothing that beats having an actual app with like an actual native experience where you can play your music and like use Bluetooth and like everything just works.
100%.
And I think also there's another aspect to that which like reflects what you were saying in terms of like the style of engagement. On a music app, it's got to be native because you use it all the time, and like just having like a 10% extra like more lovable experience because everything's a bit more polished, because everything just works a little bit better.
If it's a music app, if it's a more native experience where you have a control panel, you've got play buttons and you've got experiences that are happening outside of the app like volume adjustments and things, when those start to play in too, I think it's a really good thesis to commit to building a mobile app.
I think there's also one more thing which is like to do with your business. I think if you're at the beginning stage of your business and you don't have many customers, I think often like getting away with not having an app, and we'll talk about the compromises that you can make later where you can like almost have an app but like actually it isn't quite an app and you haven't really spent the engineering cost to get to an app. That can be really useful. So yeah, I think that's also a factor, is like where are you in your company, like the timing in terms of your company and in terms of like validating your business idea, like that's also really important because apps are expensive. So
100%.
Not having to pay is great.
Yeah, and time consuming engineering
super time consuming.
Yeah. Cool. So the second thing we're going to talk about is, well, we're going to talk about a few ways to actually build mobile applications. The first one is low-code or no-code solutions. So I think this one is incredibly useful for people who maybe don't have engineering or product experience and maybe want to kind of just validate something super quickly, build something and see if there's product market fit. I think that's a very good use case for like a low-code or no-code solution. There's a bunch out there. I think there's loads for web.
Yeah, I feel like they're like they come and go like really fast. You gotta like find one. Like just Google. I feel like Google's the best.
Yeah, Google's great. And look, not all of them stick around and like, you know, get funding and take off and become these really like well built out solutions. But there are a lot out there that you can just kind of get going with super quickly to R&D a concept and an idea super fast. I think if you're non-technical especially and you're looking to build product, I think there's no excuse. Like you must get your hands dirty, you must understand how apps are built, and there's like no better way to do that than using like a no-code or low-code app builder. Especially if you're new to startups and things like that. I don't think you should rush to outsource your app development or try find a developer if you're not someone who's technical. I think start to learn and understand how this stuff works before actually even like committing to like starting a company or anything like that. So I think that's kind of the category where low-code, no-code fits in. I don't know if there's anything else you want to maybe add to that.
Yeah, also, I mean, it's not meant to be something that lasts too long. Like your app is just going to be pretty temporary. Like if it's bad, that's totally fine.
100%.
I think also there's like a useful thing that happens when you like publish a bad first app and then you get people to use it, is that acts as a filter for your business. Obviously, like this could be a bit idealistic. It's possible that, you know, going the easy route in the beginning is better, but I think something that can happen is like, and it can happen by coincidence, is that you have a bad first app and like it's just not that great and it's like a bit annoying to use, and people use it, and then you have so much more confidence in your validation step of your business because people are just like using something that's bad. And that says a lot.
100%.
That's a really positive signal.
Very positive signal, and a great sort of like benchmark for future success. And there's no harm in sunsetting it, moving on to like the next iteration and the like more well thought out, built out version of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, whatever your first app is, you'll probably have tons of things you want to improve like immediately. So might as well do it quickly, have those things, and then improve them on something that's more permanent.
100%. Moral of the story, make sure people like it before you actually commit to anything further.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Cool.
I think there's also one more thing I want to add. I want to say that I think people often confuse like a mobile app with just an app in general, like, or just a general purpose like app, which could be an application on your desktop or on your phone, or it could just be a website. And I think that something that can happen is like you're thinking of a business, you like know that you need some form of application, but because you keep telling yourself that you need an app, you just go down this and you ask people, you ask your friends, you're like, cool, can you help me build an app? And you're just going down this path of building a native app when you actually haven't necessarily even asked yourself the question of like, what would fit best for my business and for my product and for my customers.
Totally.
And to validate like whatever you validate.
You kind of just like aimlessly just following that instinct of like people love apps.
Yeah,
so like,
absolutely.
I'm just gonna like build one.
Yeah.
Without like fully like understanding whether it's the right thing to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more thing to add is I think that the go-to-market strategy of an app is complicated, and I think that can also be a bad thing in conjunction with like if you're setting up a mobile app and you're like either doing it low code or no code, or you're like having engineers do it, like that's intense, like that's a hard thing to do. If you're just doing that because you feel like, oh, I need an app, then you don't give yourself the time to think about the go-to-market strategy and think about how you can get this app to actually be installed by people who like want to install it, which is incredibly important, and I think which is really hard. And if you publish your app and it's on the App Store, people will not install it.
100%.
Unless they have a reason to, which you need to provide.
Well, there's a really small group of diehard fans that you've managed to convince that your app is great.
Yeah.
Maybe they really think it's great, and then they tell their friends.
Yeah.
And then you get like a viral effect from that.
Yeah.
But that's very rare.
Yeah. And focusing on that is way more important than I think focusing on the tech, because
100%.
If you have that, then you can get the tech. But if you don't have that, then like doesn't matter what you build or have built, like it's useless.
100%. So especially if you're grinding to try find that like product market fit initially, low code and no code is a great way to sort of like get that initial validation. See if your customers are sticky, see if they care, look at that retention closely. I always say with consumer apps especially, like if your retention rate is lower than 30% week 12, you got work to do. So really like, using low code and no code to get that initial validation, it's a great use case for it. So now we're going to chat about more sort of robust mobile tech stacks, for example, React Native, Flutter, things like that. We maybe even can touch on Ionic, those kinds of frameworks.
Yeah.
When you should maybe be using those or thinking about going down that path during your mobile app development journey. So Max, you've had a lot of experience with React Native. We use React Native at our current startup. It's a great solution for most things, especially the cross-platform aspect of it, keeping your engineering team relatively small. With going full native iOS and Android, you're building two separate teams essentially. With a cross-platform solution like React Native or Flutter, it's one code base and things like that. It does have its own challenges. You have a lot more dependency management, a lot more sort of like general crossover between making sure things render correctly on both platforms. I think maybe you can touch more on that, but ultimately we've had pretty good experience with React Native. Haven't used Flutter, used a little bit of Ionic before, but I think React Native is a good place to be for startups and scale-ups who have that product market fit, who want to iterate quickly with a small team. Just delight users in general, I think.
Totally. I think something that's really fortunate is today React Native is mature, which is awesome. Things like animations like used to be hard and annoying, but they work great now. And there's just like a lot of things that have taken a long time and have been worked on like really hard by a lot of different people, but like now like pretty much work. I feel like React Native is in a bit of a sweet spot right now. I think also in terms of like not having to even build a website with React Native Web, which you can use to generate a web version of your app can really take advantage of writing code pretty much once or maybe twice a little bit in a couple of places and have an experience which like works great on a lot of different platforms.
100%. From my experience with the team that I work with, just dependency management has been the main sort of like headache with React Native, and like you're not able to move as quickly because sort of like hurdles to jump through sometimes with like keeping up with the latest version of this and that. With like npm and node packages and stuff, you're layering in like a lot of stuff. So it's kind of like this pile of like nonsense that kind of makes everything work.
Absolutely.
I think maybe in that sense it can be a bit of a pain, especially maybe if you're like getting a little bit bigger and there's a little bit faster things that you need to be doing with your team.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think your node modules will be big and it'll be a bit annoying, and you'll have to do React Native upgrades, which will be a bit annoying, and you'll have incompatible versions, and Reanimated will not work with the current version of React Native, and the other library you've added will also just be a little bit incompatible, and you'll have to like resolve that. It'll be very annoying. But like, I think that doesn't happen enough that it puts into question the choice of using React Native, because I think the benefits that you get like way outweighed that. So
100%.
Yeah.
Cool. Should we touch on Flutter and Ionic a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't have much experience with Flutter. I think it could be cool, but I think Ionic is pretty cool. I think that might be a little bit controversial. I think it gets a little bit of a bad reputation from the fact that it's not actually native, and I think you can kind of feel that. Like when you're tapping on the buttons and you're really paying attention, you can kind of like feel like it just doesn't quite feel right.
Yeah.
But I think that's changed a lot over the years, and I think today it's actually pretty good, and you probably wouldn't notice for simpler apps. I think for more complicated apps, then you probably wouldn't be able to get away with it.
Yeah, and I think like maybe doing like native bridging and building native components may be easier with React Native versus Ionic, just because like with React Native the whole goal is to like render everything natively anyway. Whereas Ionic essentially is basically like a web wrapper. It's kind of just like a web view in a native context where like the UI doesn't feel necessarily as like buttery smooth as you would get with like React Native or pure native.
So, but it is pretty good.
It is good. I mean, it works.
It works.
It is controversial.
It is a bit controversial.
Like it's kind of leaning on that PWA sort of like movement and group of people, which has its own benefits. They're still around.
I think maybe you can talk about your experience. You had an Ionic app. Your very first app for the company was Ionic. Yeah, I mean, I obviously wasn't as deeply involved as you, but it did seem to be like a good prototype app to like get your first few customers and get a sense of like your business.
100%. And the engineers that I was working with, especially at the time, were, that was their framework of choice. And for that moment in time to like rapidly build an MVP for what we were doing was the right choice. I mean, there was good fit, like developer framework fit, and there was nothing wrong with it. We shipped proof of concept, we got users, we used it to understand things that we wanted to find out, and for that use case, it was perfect. I think we matured a little bit as a company, and we wanted more of that sort of smoother experience, and that's why we transitioned to React Native. I think, if you don't have a real like technical product and engineering team who understands mobile, it can be challenging switching things, especially for things like auth. That was one of the major concerns, is like, okay, if we switch from Ionic, which at the time we had built our own auth JWT system, and now we moved to Firebase auth, it's like, how do you keep users like logged in, and you got to port over those access tokens and from like one thing to the other thing. So transitioning can be challenging, but it's worth it if your engineers are comfortable with the framework and can get something going super quick to validate your early sort of idea and make sure that it's actually worth building the product. Because that's, again, the most important thing here is, do people actually care about this thing rather than the framework itself?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you can use anything. You can use Java. You can build like a
maybe not.
Java servlet.
Maybe not
Do
Java.
You have a mobile web interface too, and that's maybe not that.
Maybe not that. But yeah, pretty much everything.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to mention something that influences the choice between React Native and something like Ionic, or just not even. And I think that's also another option, is like just not even having a mobile app at all, and just having a website, a web app, like maybe a React app or any other framework, and just having an interface on mobile which is like fairly optimized for mobile, in the sense that like not optimized to a great degree, just in the sense that like none of the elements like are off the screen and everything like is functional. That is totally an option, and I think it also depends on, we mentioned like like when do you build an app, and like maybe you don't build a mobile app ever, and
Totally.
maybe the type of product that you have like actually just doesn't need to be a mobile app ever, and like it could be a web app forever.
100%.
But I think something important in distinguishing that decision is the performance and like the kind of users you have and the performance of their devices. And I think the kind of users you have, they don't have the latest iPhone, and
Totally.
therefore something like Ionic, which renders a web view and isn't actually native, like just doesn't work as well.
100%. And yeah, I guess that's like understanding who's actually using the application, what segment of the market does it fall into, like how discerning is the user. Again, yeah, I think that's a good point. So the final thing that we're going to talk about is the holy grail, maybe people would say, pure native. So pure native Android apps and pure native iOS apps. So this is the holy grail, I guess, for many reasons, and the main one probably being performance. I think, in my opinion, there's a very clear reason to use native, and that's when using the native capabilities of the device itself is very crucial to the success of that product that you're building.
I think you can get some distance using like React native components, which like wrap those kinds of like native APIs. I think there's probably like some use cases in some products where like that's just too cumbersome, and probably also there's products where having raw 100% Swift code with like a small bundle size, no node modules, and like no JavaScript layer is like useful enough that it's worth doing.
100%.
Also, I mean, I guess one example of this is like if you're building an app for iOS only, like if you're building an app that uses an Apple only feature, then like
100%.
you could totally just build it in Swift. Absolutely.
Yeah, if you want to build something that's targeting iPhone users, go ahead and use Swift. SwiftUI is great as well. Like SwiftUI is kind of like almost like a low-code thing. You can kind of drag things in. I think Apple's like developer environment is really good as well. Again, if you're good at React Native and it can do everything you need it to do, and you're only shipping on iOS, go ahead. What's wrong with it? There is a point with phase of a company as well where you're so far past product market fit that your day-to-day becomes less about like, does this app fundamentally work? Do people care about it? And more about like, what are these small optimizations that we can make to improve user experience? And like one thing where native may offer a bit of a leg up there is because it's not relying on components that people are building that you're like importing and stuff. As when it comes to big like scroll views, for example, and things like that, where we've seen, for example, some performance issues on, again, lower end devices, not being able to keep up with the frame rate of scrolls with like a lot of items in a list and things like that. I think that's where native can give you that like extra little boost of like, oh wow, this just feels so good. And it's probably the reason why it's a choice to go that route for a lot of bigger, more established products and brands. And the funny thing though is that some companies will go pure native, but then use React Native in certain parts of their application. For example, like the onboarding flow. So like your core application could be full native, but they'll opt to bring in React Native into the onboarding flow because they want to simply like have maybe live updates and like, you know, where they're doing real-time updates with JS, you know, they want to iterate and micro-optimize the onboarding flow. So there are like some cases where you blend the two together. But I think pure native is just a great choice if you want that super slick experience for the hyper UX, UI conscious consumer.
To add to that, I think gap has been narrowing. I mentioned this in the beginning, like React Native has gotten really mature. And I think part of that is included, it has gotten really close to native. But I agree that like for some things, just not quite native.
Totally.
I think also, I mean, that brings to mind something about React Native, which is really great as well, which is over-the-air updates, where like, hey, you want to change your onboarding flow, you want to change some of your business logic, cool, just ship an over-the-air update.
And no problem. There you have it. You don't have to wait for App Store review. Max is working at the moment with, I think, Microsoft Code Push. That's the framework you're using. And there's others like Expo have one, real-time updates.
Expo is good. I want to talk about Expo.
Okay, let's talk about Expo.
I think something that I feel like needs to be a message that needs to be spread is that Expo is good now. Expo used to be bad. Expo is good now.
And that's interesting because we were looking at Expo in the early days of our React Native journey, and at that point we actually made the decision not to.
Yes, yeah, the correct decision. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so we did well there with that
yeah,
decision.
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
But Expo have been super hard at work, and I think it's paid off. And like I think their product now is really good. And there's a number of limitations which were deal breakers for like a lot of people that they've removed. Particularly, there used to be a limitation where interfacing with any native functionality used to be like already restricted, and there was a library of Expo utilities that you could use to access things like the camera and like geolocation and stuff like that. And it was a pretty good sized library, but like anything that wasn't in their library, it basically meant that you couldn't use Expo at all. And that meant like, oh well, you know, the app is an Expo app. From the beginning, it was like built on Expo, and that's like quite an annoying realization to have.
We need to
rework our app now. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's changed. Well, that has changed.
Yeah.
And now you don't have to worry about that. You can use native modules in Expo. You can use any React Native module, no problem, and you can use an Expo app. And I think they've also just put a bunch of other stuff on top of that, which is really cool, like Expo app services. I think is good. We don't actually use, I don't think we use any of Expo app services, but I think they are pretty good. So
okay, well,
I might do that. Yeah, maybe we will in the future.
Well, maybe we'll do another video on Expo if once you actually go ahead and try it.
If I preach too much about it. And then one more thing about Expo is Expo Router, which we haven't been using, but I mean, I think getting really good. And I think there's another synergy with Expo Router, and when you're building your application for the web, like with React Native Web. And I think Expo Routers has that use case in mind, and they're building for that, which I think is great to see, because I think routing for React Native Web projects is a little bit annoying without that. Totally. There's some things like server-side rendering that are great, but you might struggle if you don't use Expo Router, so maybe you should try it out. I'm not hired by Expo.
Expo, if you're watching this, I think Max deserves something.
I think so. Yeah, I'm expecting a treat from Expo.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope that was useful, and I think that next time you're thinking of embarking on a mobile app building journey, consider these points, but also take them with a pinch of salt. This is kind of our own experience, but I think there's a lot that can be taken from it. And again, it doesn't really matter, because if you build something and make a mistake, you learn from it and you move on. So I think just going ahead and starting and picking something is not a bad decision in itself.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for watching. We'll see you guys in some other videos. Cheers.